two more senators. We have Labor's Malarndirri McCarthy joining us right here in the studio.
Hello.
Welcome back, Malarndirri. And Liberal Senator Holly Hughes, once again familiar to viewers of this program. Malarndirri McCarthy, why don't we start with you, because you've covered a lot of ground, literally, in recent days, coming as you have from the Garma Festival. This momentum that everyone's talking about around the Voice, triggered in no small part by the Prime Minister himself. How's it going to be built on? What needs to be happening between now and the next sort of significant set of details to be announced?
Oh, look, absolutely, Greg. I mean, it was wonderful to be at Garma, at Gulkula, and to be with the Yolngu, but also thousands of other Australians in relation to what occurred around the Prime Minister's announcement on the question, or the draft question, to the Australian people. For us, I think the next step is to really engage with all Australians, not just First Nations. We've seen, as we saw with Megan Davis there, that over the last 10 to 15 years, the engagement has largely been amongst First Nations people, and obviously here in the Parliament, with the previous reports of both Senator Dodson and Julian Leeser, and also, of course, both Professors Tom Calmer and Marcia Langton. So now it is actually about all Australians having a conversation. And I have to say, Greg, it's so important that that conversation is respectful. It is going to be difficult. People are going to hear things that maybe they don't like. They're going to be out of their comfort zone. But I think our country's bigger than that. And this is the time to really do it well and have the respectful conversation. Yeah,
I'm sure you would agree about tone and conduct and decorum, Holly, but it is a matter of public record that many on your side are already asking the questions, you know, some of them quite legitimate. Please explain the detail around how this body works, the limit of its powers, who's elected to it. So my question is, are they putting the cart before the horse here? What's wrong with the process as outlined by the Prime Minister, one which goes to, I suppose, values first of all, and then you, politicians, work on the details later?
Well, the referendum question doesn't have any detail in it. And when you're asking Australians to change the Constitution, I think they will want more detail. They will want answers to how are people going to be elected to this body. Is the Parliament in a position that it can dismantle the body if required, as we saw needed to happen when ATSIC was in place previously? And I do think it's one of the problems that this could run into. And again, in that spirit of having a respectful debate, when people ask questions and have concerns over the details, how much it's going to cost, what is this actually going to achieve with regards to really helping Indigenous Australians, particularly those in remote communities, and closing the gap, when they're asking for those details, to not be screeched at that they must be a racist if they're not automatically supporting this without asking questions. So we noticed, you know, you just displayed Senator Thorpe's behaviour in the Senate before, and I would suggest every time Senator Thorpe opens her mouth and conducts one of these stunts, it's going to make it more and more difficult.
Can I just ask you one follow-up, because it is coming through from various writers and I think some Conservatives. They call this a race-based insertion into our Constitution. Now, I think that's heavily disputed, but is that a view that you agree with?
I have concerns about us being defined by race rather than all Australians, and I think Senator Price very clearly articulated in her maiden speech last week that we are all Australians, and by differentiating the group, you do run the risk of creating division rather than bringing people together. So I think those are the questions and discussions that need to be had.
Are these fair enough? And when might the answers come to them? Well, let me work it backwards with you, Malarndirri McCarthy. This assertion that it is a race-based clause that's being put into our Constitution, why is that false?
Well, I would obviously disagree with that, and this is what having the conversation with the Australian people is about. And I just would like to pick up on a few comments there as well that Senator Hughes has raised, and the issue around raising the social policy concerns in terms of First Nations people. Of course, we're very aware of that, and we're going to look at both of that. We can have investment in health, education and housing at the same time as a conversation with the Australian people about this Constitution. And that's what this time is. And I do say that we can do that, and our country has shown we can.
Do you foresee a rollout of information so that when people go to the ballot box in the referendum, they do have some clear indications, if not from the government, then maybe from the parliament, about how they're going to form the voice.
Look, from a personal perspective even, Greg, it's not even just about the parliament. I'm enormously passionate about this this road ahead and certainly very cognisant of the fact of the journey travelled so far. The Yolngu people, Galarrwuy Yunupingu and others who stood there and have stood there, Gama after Gama after Gama, with 3 prime ministers urging, firstly, Malcolm Turnbull, urging Scott Morrison and now Anthony Albanese to do something. This is what this is about, and I certainly want to see that happen. And we don't have to feel like the sky's going to fall in, Greg. I think this is really important, that we can have this conversation across Australia, be bold, be brave, and create a better future.
Yeah, no risk, no reward, but have you contemplated in your own mind how much to the detriment of Indigenous wellbeing would be the rejection of this question?
Look, we're a resilient people. It's something that I'm enormously proud of, and I know that we have endured much over many decades, if not centuries, in terms of policies of all sorts. And yes, you can struggle and wrestle with that, Greg, but I think as the Prime Minister said at Gama on the weekend, it's not so much about failing, it's about failing to try.
Would you be prepared to state your current intention on voting, just not so much as a politician, but when the moment came and you had to cast a ballot, Holly Hughes, do you actually have a predetermined position?
I don't have a predetermined position, and as Senator McCarthy and I both know, quite often when you look at legislation, the devil is in the detail, and that is why I do think it is important that there is more detail provided, not only to the Parliament but to all Australians, and how this is going to work. You sort of said to me, is it not putting the horse before the cart? That, I think actually having this simpler question is putting the cart before the horse, and there will be some. Some people will resile from that because they won't know what they're actually voting for.
Yep. Well, here's a question that you're both going to have to cast votes on before too long. It's territory rights, and I might start with you, Mel, because I'm pretty sure I know where you stand on this. It looks like it's all going to come very quickly towards a resolution and probably successful passage in the Parliament. I think I know exactly what you're going to say about that, but what flows from that is voluntary assisted dying, and you're comfortable with that from a conscience point of view? Well,
let's just step back one, if I can, Greg. Firstly, I do want to commend my colleagues in the House for bringing this bill forward in the House of Reps. It is a bill that is and has been quite critical. Even the former Senator for the CLP, who then left the CLP, Sam McMahon, did bring it into the Senate, and it expired with the election. Now, I understand that territory rights is critical to the people of the Northern Territory and certainly to our Parliament and the opportunity to debate things. And of course, if this bill goes through, then it will be up to those MLAs in the Legislative Assembly to have those discussions and to think very deeply about what they want to do.
Not that you're being asked to vote on that per se, but do you have a position on conscience that you declare on voluntary assisted dying?
Well, this bill is about territory rights.
I appreciate that.
So of course, that is a bill that most politicians, and even on the Labor side, will have the opportunity to think about where they're voting. And I will certainly support the rights of the Territory to be able to make its legislation.
All right. How do you approach this, Holly? You're going to have to vote yourself. Is it about territory rights? Is it inseparably about voluntary assisted dying, and therefore which way are you going to vote?
So look, it is two things, and it is a conscience vote, and it is giving the approval to then go on to the voluntary assisted dying legislation, and again, that was always a conscience vote, certainly within the Liberal Party. But what concerns me about this is what the ramifications can then be, not necessarily about voluntary assisted dying, but if we look at what's being proposed by the two territory governments at the moment, or what's occurred in the Northern Territory, we've seen the overturning of the alcohol bans, despite there being much resistance from a number of Indigenous groups calling for them to come back, and the Labor government there is refusing to do so. But then you've also got
limited.
No, you've also got the ACT Labor government that's wanting to legislate ice and heroin.
When's
the next overreach? When's the next bill allowing them to then operate? They are territories, not states. They operate under a different set of parameters. And I do think these are the things, because, too often I think some of these things are done with a consideration for consequences a little bit further down the track, and I think we need to keep those in mind.
Can I just clarify that though, Greg, that Holly's referring to the Stronger Futures legislation, which is a federal legislation, and that's what expired in July, in last month.
But it's not coming
that
back.
Was not
So are you
Northern
bringing it
Territory.
back?
Well, when we're talking about territory rights, we're not talking about that.
No, but I mean,
piece of
this is in the
legislation
territory,
which
and
belongs to the federal parliament. So I have to be clear on that.
well, it's the territory. It's the territory chief minister who's refusing to act on this issue and has stated that
that's
very
incorrect.
clearly.
Yeah, but to your point, Holly, whether it be progressive drug law reform in the ACT or Indigenous policy in the Northern Territory, would you be open to further federal interventions, as Kevin Andrews did in other areas? If so, yeah, there are no territory rights, are there? If the Senate is, or the Parliament is going to constantly overrule, would you be advocating that on other adventurous, what you might see as adventurous policy exercises by these assemblies?
Well, I think some of these assemblies are putting in place some very far left-wing extreme ideals, and I don't think there'd be many Australians out there advocating for the legalisation of ice and heroin. So, they are smaller assemblies, they are smaller levels of government, they do not fund themselves, they are funded by the Commonwealth predominantly, and therefore we do need to make sure that some of those constitutional structures, as we're talking about the Constitution, the constitutional structures stay in place because they're there for a reason.
All right.
And Greg, just to finish on the question that you were trying to get from me is whether I support voluntary assisted
You don't have to
dying.
declare it, by the way.
No, but I personally would not support it, but I do support the right of the territory to debate it and make their own decision.
No, understood. And look, some of the best debates you hear in this place are those that are held on conscience lines, because people are unshackled, aren't they, to speak from the heart and from their values. Malarndirri, McCarthy, Holly Hughes, there's much more we could cover, but we won't today. We're going to do that next time. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.